the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands must justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. James Madison. History remembers the American Revolution as the birth of a nation, but winning independence was only half the battle. The far greater challenge was answering a question no nation had successfully answered before. How do you build a government powerful enough to govern, yet restrained enough to preserve liberty? The 13 former colonies had already experienced both extremes. They had suffered under the centralized authority of the British Crown. Then, after independence, they experimented the weak Article of Confederation, where the national government possessed little authority. Neither system worked. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 offered a new solution, a careful, balanced government, founded not on the powers of individuals, but on the rule of law. Yet writing a constitution was one thing, putting it into practice was something entirely different. No Congress had ever operated under this constitution. No American president had ever held executive authority. No Supreme Court yet existed. Every institution had to be created from scratch. Every decision would become a precedent. Every action would determine whether the Constitution would succeed or fail. This is the remarkable story of how America's first government machinery was established under the Constitution. The United States Constitution officially became effective on March 4, 1789. However, the new government did not immediately begin functioning. Travel across America was slow. Representatives from distant states required weeks to reach New York City, the temporary national capital, because the Constitution required a quorum. Before Congress could conduct official businesses, legislative work would remain delayed. Finally, in April 1789, enough representatives arrived. For the first time in history, the Constitution moved from paper to reality. Unlike the Article of Confederation, this new federal government possessed clearly defined constitutional authority. Congress could tax, Congress could regulate interstate and foreign commerce, Congress could maintain an army and navy. The executive branch could enforce federal laws. The judiciary could interpret those laws. The framers had not created a government of unlimited power. Instead, they had established a government of limited but effective constitutional authority. This balance would become one of the defining features of American Constitution. The Constitution created a legislature unlike any America had previously known. Congress consisted of two separate chambers. The House of Representatives represented the people. The Senate represented the states. This arrangement resulted from the famous Great Compromise reached during the Constitutional Convention. Large states wanted representation according to population. Smaller states demanded equal representation. The Constitution satisfied both. The House reflected population. The Senate granted every state 2 senators. This compromise preserved national unity while respecting state equality. But establishing Congress involved much more than seating representatives. The first Congress had to transform constitutional language into functioning institutions. One of its earliest achievements was organizing executive departments. Congress established the Department of State, the Department of the Treasury, and the Department of War. These departments became the administrative backbone of the federal government. Congress also passed the Judicial Act of 1789, one of the most influential laws in American history. Although Article 3 of the Constitution created a Supreme Court, it left many detailed undefined. The Judiciary Act solved this problem. It established 6 Supreme Court justices. It created federal district courts and circuit courts. It defined the jurisdiction of the federal judiciary. Without this legislation, the judicial branch could not effectively function. Congress also faced another important political challenge. Many anti-federalists feared that the Constitution granted excessive authority to the federal government while failing to protect individual liberties. James Madison responded by introducing amendments designed to safeguard fundamental rights. After extensive debate, 10 amendments were ratified in 1791. These became known as Bill of Rights: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, protection against unreasonable searches, due process of law, trial by jury. These protections reassured many Americans that constitutional government would protect liberty rather than threaten it. Within only 2 years, the first Congress had not merely passed legislation, it had constructed the institutional foundation of the American Republic. While Congress organized the legislative branch, and other office demanded equal attention. The presidency. The Constitution granted executive authority to a single president. Many Americans initially feared this arrangement. After all, they had just fought a revolution against a king. Would a president eventually become another monarch? Only one man enjoyed enough public trust to answer that concern, George Washington. In the Electoral College, every elector voted for Washington. He became the only president in American history to receive unanimous electoral support. On April 30, 1789, Washington took the presidential oath in New York City. He fully understood that his actions would shape the office forever. There were no presidential traditions, no previous administrations, no executive precedents. Every decision mattered. Washington assembled America's first cabinet. Thomas Jefferson became Secretary of State. Alexander Hamilton became Secretary of the Treasury. Henry Knox served as the Secretary of War. Edmund Randolph became Attorney General. Although the Constitution never explicitly required a cabinet, Washington believed expert advice would strengthen executive decision-making. His practice became a permanent feature of American government. Washington also demonstrated remarkable constitutional restraint. He respected congressional authority. He refused to exceed constitutional limits. He consulted advisors before making major decisions. Perhaps most importantly, he proved that executive leadership could coexist with Republican liberty. America had created an executive, not a king. The framers understood one lesson from history better than any other. Unchecked power eventually destroys freedom. To prevent tyranny, they divided government into three independent branches. Congress would make laws, the president would enforce laws, the court would interpret laws. Each branch possessed its own constitutional responsibilities. The principle became known as separation of powers. Its intellectual foundation came largely from French philosopher Baron de Montesquieu, whose influential work, The Spirit of the Laws, argued that liberty could survive only if governmental powers remained divided. However, the American Constitution improved upon this theory. The framers added an additional safeguard: checks and balances. Congress could approve legislation. The president could veto it. Congress could override a veto with a two-thirds majority. The president nominated judges. The Senate confirmed those appointments. Congress controlled taxation and appropriations. The judiciary possessed the authority to interpret laws and eventually, through judicial review established in Marbury v. Madison 1803, determine whether laws complied with the Constitution. This system intentionally made government slower. Compromise became necessary. Cooperation became essential. No branch could dominate the others. James Madison believed ambition should counter ambition. Each branch would naturally defend its own constitutional authority. In doing so, each would help preserve liberty. The framers reorganized that perfect leaders could never be granted. Therefore, they designed institutions capable of limiting imperfect leaders. That remains one of the Constitution's great achievements. By the close of America's first constitutional year, something extraordinary had occurred. The Constitution was no longer merely a written document. It had become a living government. Congress was legislating. The presidency was functioning. Federal courts had begun operating. The Bill of Rights was underway. The principle of separation of powers had become a practical reality rather than a political theory. More than 2 centuries later, these same constitutional institutions continue to define American government. Governments around the world have borrowed ideas from this constitutional design. The success of American experiment did not depend solely upon military victory or charismatic leadership. Its greatest strength lay in carefully constructed institutions, constitutional limits, and enduring belief that no person should ever stand above the law. That is why the first government established under the Constitution remains one of the most significant movements not only in American history but in history of constitutional democracy itself. The Constitution is the guide which I never will abandon. George Washington.